We are 3 weeks away from opening day, and what will the Texas Rangers roster look like on opening day? Who is going to be making cuts? Who is going to be hurt? All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan since 2010, the founder and host for all 4 seasons of this Locked On Rangers podcast. Thank y'all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Subscribe on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Before we get into today's show, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Now, initially, I was saving this episode for Friday, but a little miscommunication with the Locked On Angels folks, and wasn't able to get their episode up today, but we will have a crossover for Friday's episode with the Locked On Angels boys. A whole lot of fun, so be sure to check out that in your feeds tomorrow. But on today's show, we are getting into my final version 2 opening day roster projection, and there's one last thing before we get into that. I wanted to make a note of a former Ranger great, Mitch Moreland, who retired. Mitch was one of my favorite players. I don't know why I really gravitated towards him, but 2010 was kind of the start of my in-earnest fandom. I always kind of grew up a Rangers fan, but like really got sucked in at the start of the 2010 season, and actually ended up getting a signed Mitch Moreland baseball from one of my best friends who went out to spring training and got his signature. And I've got this little display that is conveniently right out of range of my podcast camera angle, which is a real shame because it looks so pretty. And maybe if I move into a new place, you'll be able to see that. But anyway, Mitch Moreland, I just wanted to give a shout out to him, a former Ranger great, 37 years old, spent 7 seasons with the Texas Rangers, including the best teams. He was on all of the playoff teams of the 2010s, came up as a rookie in 2010, had a really nice season then, had a career year in 2015 with the Rangers, 23 bombs that year, which was his career high, and another season with 23 bombs in 2013. I don't know why. Just something about this guy kind of stuck with me. One of 3 Ranger greats to play first base and come from Mississippi State. The second in that tradition. Maybe there was another one that I'm forgetting, but Rafael Palmeiro, obviously, and Nathaniel Lowe, following in Mitch Moreland's footsteps as well. So shout out to Mitch Moreland. Hat tip for a great career and a really unheralded part of those 2010 Rangers teams. But this is going to be another fun Rangers team this year, and some curveballs that have been thrown to us in this roster projection. I remember at the beginning of spring training when I did this first one, I thought, okay, yeah, this is pretty cut and dry. Everything's pretty simple. There's not a whole lot of change that I thought. The question was, who's going to play left field? Who's going to play left field? Well, now the question is who's going to play center field because of Leody Taveras' injury. Did an extensive episode on that on Monday, so go check out that to hear about the ramifications of that. There's a little bit of an update that it's going to be maybe a couple weeks before Leody is going to be ready and to even like kind of get back on the field. So I'm thinking that his opening day roster spot is in jeopardy. Once he's healthy, he's going to be the center fielder. That's just what it is. He is out of minor league options, so that is where we are. But let us start with the infield, the very solid, assured. We know exactly what we're getting. At catcher, we're going to have Jonah Heim. First base is going to be Nathaniel Lowe. Marcus Semien at second, Corey Seager at shortstop, and Josh Young at third. That is going to be the way it looks for the vast majority of the season. Obviously, you're going to have some catching duties split between Jonah Heim and who I believe will be the primary DH in Mitch Garver, but that lineup is going to be pretty set in stone, at least the top 3. And the outfield, as of right now, I think for opening day, it's going to look like this: Robbie Grossman in left field, Bubba Thompson in center field, and Adolis Garcia in right field. I feel like that's pretty standard. It's pretty set in stone. We'll see a little bit of how things change once Leody gets back, how his injury will affect the rest of this roster, but I feel pretty good about that projection. I don't think there's going to be much deviation, but the bench is kind of where things start to get a little bit topsy-turvy, and I'm not exactly sure what to make of it right now. I feel like I have a pretty good handle on what it is, but I don't think it's going to be a very deep bench. Right now, I'm thinking there's going to be four position players that are on the bench, and right now, my best bet as to who those guys are is going to be Josh Smith, Brad Miller, Clint Frazier, and Travis Jankowski. So we are at 13 position players. Exactly half of the roster is going to be position players for the 26-man roster that it is now. So I don't love including Brad Miller on here. Not that he's been bad necessarily this season. It's just last year really left a bad taste in my mouth of the Brad Miller experience. I was really excited about having him on a multi-year deal when the Rangers signed him. Thought, okay, this guy can play a little bit of third, a little bit of first, a little bit of left field, and absolutely mash against righties. And, well, he can't really play third. He can play first. Can't super play left field. It's fine. It's just not great. And using one of your spots for a guy who's a versatility guy, but not really that versatile and didn't do the one thing that he was supposed to do last year and mash against righties or really against anybody, to be quite honest. And I think there's still a very good player in there in Brad Miller. He's going to be 33 this year, so he is a little on the older side, but it wasn't that long ago that he had a fantastic season with Philadelphia or that really good season with St. Louis in 2020, the shortened season with an OPS over 800. But I haven't seen that player yet for the Rangers. Saw little spurts, like a 2-week stretch, a little bit in May. But other than that, for the most of the season, it was just like this was a really, really rough experience. He had injuries. The hip injury kept him out for a long time last year. But using one of those precious roster spots, when you only got 4 bench guys, and one of them is a guy who isn't really doing a whole lot for you, that gets really kind of dicey pretty quickly. I have Clint Frazier and Travis Jankowski on there because Jankowski has played center field for the Rangers in spring training. I'm not the highest guy on him. I'm leaning more towards Clint Frazier, and I think at this point, if this is where the Rangers are, depending on how long Leody is out, but for the time that Leody's out, I think the backup center fielder is probably going to be Adolis, but you want to have another guy who can play center field. Grossman, if you're really in a pinch, you can throw him in there. Josh Smith, I think, would probably be the likely option. Smith, I think, is going to get a lot of time because he can play so many different positions. He can play third, he can play shortstop, he can play second, he can play in left field or center field. And I think that they're going to get a lot of use out of him. And I would have liked to included Ezekiel Duran here. It was kind of a question, but I don't think that, at least to start the season with where they are right now, I don't think that Duran and Smith are going to both be on the opening day roster. I kind of like the upside of Duran more, but as a bench bat and as what the Rangers need for this roster, I think Josh Smith just makes a little bit more sense. He is a very polished player. Would like to see a little bit more power from him. I'm sure he would like to see more power from himself, but he's legitimate shortstop. I think defensively he's better than Duran at the infield positions. He doesn't have quite as strong an arm as Duran, but he has softer hands. He's a little bit more of a natural shortstop. I think center field, eventually Duran is going to have the edge on Smith because in terms of straight line speed, Duran is faster, but in terms of quickness, which is more of the quick twitch things you want on the infield for your shortstops, that is something that Josh Smith does a little bit better than Duran at this point. I think we can get a little bit of Clint Frazier staying in the big leagues even after after Leody gets off the IL. I really like Clint Frazier as a guy who I wanted the Rangers to go get, and I haven't been able to see him. I haven't been able to watch that closely of these spring training games because not that many of them are televised. But I think that he could make a decent impact on this roster. Coming up, we're going to get into a little bit of the pitchers, what I think the opening day lineup is going to look like, and a little bit more. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories, you have got to try yourself a Built Bar. I know it feels like we just got through the holidays, we're heading into spring break, and you're trying to, get in better shape for, sticking to your New Year's resolutions if you still are, and early to mid-March, then hats off to you because that is very impressive. I know I've lapsed a little bit, but whenever I'm trying to eat a little bit healthier, trying to grab myself a snack that it will be a little bit filling, but also good for me, I like to grab myself a Built Bar. They are so delicious. They have got some kind of mad scientists over there that are somehow finding ways to make something absolutely delicious and also good for you. I don't know how they do it. It must be magic. Maybe it's a little bit of science, but they do it over and over again, and hats off to the people at Built Built Bar for all these delicious flavors. You can go order them at built.com, or now you don't have to wait to order them and for them to ship to your house. You can go get them at your local Walmart or your local Sam's Club as well. So go check them out. Gotta grab yourself a box. You can thank me later. Now let's look a little bit at the opening day lineup. Right now, I think it's going to look like this. I think there's not going to be a lot of change in the top 4, maybe even top 5 of the lineup. We'll see how the hitters 6 through 9 end up changing throughout the year. Not sure that is set in stone, but I think it's going to start with Marcus Semien leading off and playing second base, Corey Seager in the 2-hole at shortstop, Nathaniel Lowe at first base. In the 3-hole, Adolis Garcia batting cleanup, Mitch Garver DHing and hitting 5th. Adolis Garcia, by the way, playing right field. Robbie Grossman hitting 6th and playing left field. Josh Young hitting 7th, playing 3rd. Jonah Heim catching and hitting 8th. And Bubba Thompson in center field batting 9th. I like that lineup a lot. I like the depth. I like the balance of handedness. You go right, left, left, right, right, switch right, switch right. It is a good balance of lefties versus righties. Balancing that is kind of my thought process. I think that Josh Young will probably provide a little bit more offensive value than Robbie Grossman this year. I could be wrong, but having 3 right-handed hitters in a row was something that I wanted to split up, and I think the Rangers will want to split up as well. That's why I put Robbie Grossman hitting 6th, even though eventually he might be hitting 7th or 8th. Maybe Heim is the one that they put up hitting 6th. Heim did have a very, very impressive first half of last year. I think it was a 787 OPS in the first half before kind of falling off a little bit of a cliff there at the end. But I really like this lineup and the depth in the bottom, like from the top of the order to the middle to the bottom. Like every third of this lineup feels very, very good. If Josh Young is your 7-hole hitter, that is a really darn good lineup, and I am super excited to see it in action on opening day in exactly 3 weeks. Now, we have talked about the lineup. Let's get into a little bit of the pitchers. We have 5 starting pitchers, and I think that Levi Weaver kind of put it best in his opening day roster projection. The 5 starting pitchers we have the 5 starting pitchers, and they will be that until they aren't. And it's basically just going to be an injury that kind of changes that. I don't think there's going to be a lot of competition from anybody else on the roster or in the minor leagues that is going to really push any of those 5 guys out. It is probably just going to be an injury. I'm hoping that nobody is just so bad that they need to be yeeted out of the rotation. But I think the lineup or the starting rotation will stack up like this at this point. Jacob deGrom, obviously, day 1, opening day starter. Martin Perez, pitching second. Part of that is because he has been healthy. I think he'll be the most ready. He's going to the World Baseball Classic. Also, shout out to Martin Perez for singing the Venezuelan national anthem for one of the practice scrimmage games that Team Venezuela was playing, I think against the Astros, where they beat the Astros, which is just kind of fun. Just very beautiful singing voice, just kind of a nice moment for Martin. But I'm thinking he's going to be second, at least to start the year. Maybe eventually they move him down. But at number 3, I have Jon Gray. He is slightly more healthy than guy number 4 in Nathan Eovaldi. He pitched pitched 3 scoreless innings on Wednesday and looked very good while doing so. Didn't walk anybody, allowed just 1 hit and 1 strikeout. So I think that might be where they put him. Nathan Eovaldi, who has left side tightness, has been sidelined for a few days. I have not seen anything about him starting pitching back again, but I think that he'll end up being fine. But maybe pushing him further down in the rotation, at least to start the season, might be the way that the Rangers go, just to kind of give him a little bit more space. He did come in a little bit more ready to spring training this year because he thought he was going to pitch in the WBC, but a weird insurance situation kind of nixed that, and it didn't end up happening. So sitting him down for, what's it been, 4 or 5 days, I think, with the left side tightness and not throw it back and throwing again, I think he'll still be ready for opening day, but pushing him back 1 or 2 days might end up being the way the Rangers kind of keep him from having to miss a start. And then number 5, we have Andrew Heaney. That is probably where he's going to be. Thankfully, Heaney's been healthy in spring training. He's felt good and has looked pretty decent in his outings. Had a couple of bombs that he gave up and has walked a few more people than is characteristic of Andrew Heaney, but he's healthy. and he is throwing with confidence, and he feels good about himself. And really, you know what, with all the weird little ticky-tack injuries that kind of come in spring training, I will absolutely take that from the Heen dog, Andrew Heaney, as our Locked On Angels boys called him yesterday. But let's look at the bullpen, always the most impossible to predict and confusing part of any roster. We're going to get into that and more, a few of the changes from this, and how I feel about this opening day roster compared to last year's opening day roster. But before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. You can bet on Luka and Kyrie doing some basketball things if that is your kind of deal, or they are going to have some upcoming lines about Major League Baseball, how many wins the Rangers can have, and I'm sure we'll be getting some over-unders on Rangers projections. So you can bet on all of those things. You can even combine bets for a chance at a bigger pay cut with the same game parlay, so don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now, let's take a look at this Rangers bullpen. It should be, I believe, much improved. We have a bit of a change from last time out, a guy who the Rangers have signed since I did my version 1 of this opening day roster projection. Will Smith is in there. Let's start with, this is just in my order of the way that I think about these relievers. Jose Leclerc, Jonathan Hernandez, Brock Burke, Taylor Hearn, Will Smith, Josh Sborz, Joe Barlow, and Glenn Otto. That is 8. An 8-man bullpen, which is kind of feels like the standard at this point. But I feel pretty good about that bullpen. Now, Glenn Otto is the one that was literally the last one on this list, and I kind of went back and forth on whether or not to include him or Josh Sborz. I think the Rangers are probably going to include Josh Sborz just because he's out of minor league options. I think Glenn Otto has one, but you might notice a name that is missing. It is Jake Odorizzi. That is not because I don't think Odorizzi is going to be a big part of this team, but I don't know that he's necessarily going to be ready for opening day. This is the opening day lineup projection, not the April 3rd roster projection. So, Odorizzi was left off. I think that once he comes back, he is probably going to be in that Glenn Otto role of multi-inning reliever. Maybe he pushes out Josh Sborz. Maybe they figure out what Josh Sborz is finally. It's the 2 years with the Rangers has been a question of who is this guy? Is he really the guy who has the elite stuff and can actually use it, or is he a guy who's got really elite stuff and just cannot get a handle on it, because that is kind of who he has been. At least last year, he was a little bit more of the elite stuff and kind of it actually working in 2021. But I am excited to see what Josh Sborz is. If he is a kind of back-end reliever and can back that stuff up and use it more effectively, then that's great. And I think the Rangers have got something special in there. Again, he is a former second-round pick of the Los Angeles Dodgers, a team that is incredibly good at scouting and developing guys. Now, if they punted on him sometimes, that means, okay, maybe you should too. But they have had the occasional miss of guys like, Yordan Alvarez, who they traded away to the Astros for some reliever who I don't even remember who it is, and it kind of pisses me off that they did that, because now it's the Rangers' problem to deal with Yordan Alvarez with the Astros. And there is, who is it? O'Neal Cruz, who is also signed and developed by the Dodgers and traded away for some middling reliever to the Pirates, and now O'Neal Cruz is a 6'6" mammoth monster hitting shortstop that is an absolute weirdo and just aberration of a player that is so fun to see. So occasionally they do make some mistakes, and so maybe the Rangers could capitalize on that and turn Josh Sborz into something really great. But I think that we're going to see Jake Odorizzi on this roster at some point playing a big role. I feel much better about this bullpen than I did at the start of last year. Granted, especially the start of last year, the Rangers were in a really rough way with the bullpen. They had some decent arms. Brett Martin was playing a much bigger role. Dennis Santana was playing a role and still on the team. But the Rangers didn't have Jose Leclerc or Jonathan Hernandez until what felt like basically the midpoint of the season. And even then, it took them a little bit of time to round into form. Towards the end of the year, they kind of looked like themselves. They looked like dominant back-end relievers, and I feel like people don't give them enough credit for how good those guys are. And the thing I talked about, I believe it was on yesterday's show, of the thing that I like about those first 4 guys that I listed, in Leclerc, Hernandez, Burke, and Hearn, all those guys are going to pitch in high leverage situations, and all of them can go multiple innings if you need them. They can be used in different situations. It gives Bruce Bochy a bunch of options of how to use his bullpen. He is very creative in the use of his bullpen, especially in the playoffs. That is one of the most difficult things for any manager to do, and Bruce Bochy just has that magic touch of knowing each of his relievers, knowing how to best get through to them, how to motivate them, how to encourage them, how to sometimes piss them off in the right way, enough to channel it into something constructive, because he was an absolute genius when it came to that in his World Series runs with the San Francisco Giants. The Rangers have a lot of really good options in this pen. Will Smith is a very nice addition. I think he was kind of the last little piece that the Rangers needed. Would have digged having Matt Moore back, and would have really liked for him to not go to a division rival, because I do still think he is pretty good. I get it, because Burke and Hearn are very similar in what they did for the Rangers without that super high walk rate that Matt Moore had. And I think Joe Barlow is definitely having him not as the closer, having him as kind of a mid reliever, kind of I don't know, the 6th inning guy. Just come in for one inning. Say you have Andrew Heaney, who's not going super deep into games. Say he goes give you 5 innings, and the Rangers are up 3-1 or 3-2 or whatever, and you don't really want to use any of your high leverage guys. Maybe Brock Burke pitched a couple innings the day before, and you don't really want to throw out Hearn or Smith at that point, and you're saving Josh Spores, and you throw out Joe Barlow for 1 inning in the 6th. It can get you to that 7th inning, and say you want to use Jonathan Hernandez for 2 innings that day, and then Leclerc for the save in the 9th. I would feel really good about that kind of usage of the bullpen, and having those different options, or maybe throwing Glenn Otto in kind of a similar vein as a right-handed Brock Burke. Maybe not quite as effective. I'm really interested to see what Glenn Otto just looks like as a reliever, because I think that is probably his role, and in my mind, with that velocity ticking up, with that nasty slider, I think he could be maybe not quite as dominant as Burke was last year, because that's a really high bar to put on anybody, and I think even expecting Burke to repeat what he did last year, maybe that's asking a bit much. I think he can do it. Maybe he can even get better, but asking him to go 82 innings with 90 strikeouts and a sub-2 ERA out of the bullpen, that is difficult for anybody to do. Fewer than 3 walks per 9, nearly 10 strikeouts per 9. Relievers are very inconsistent, and so you gotta appreciate the good years when you have them, and guys who are that good from year to year. That is why Jose Leclerc got that contract extension that he did with those options in there, and he's making $5 million this year, because he's pretty consistent, and he has some really, really good stuff, and the Rangers know what they're getting from him. I think they also know what they're getting from all those top 4 guys, Will Smith included. I think he gives the Rangers that kind of left-handed setup guy who has pitched in very high leverage situations and has succeeded with that. Granted, he has not been as effective last year. Wasn't super effective with the Braves to start last year, and wasn't used a whole bunch in that World Series run of that team that is south of here. But he got himself a ring, and he was hugely instrumental in the Braves winning in 2021 and beating the Astros in the World Series and beating a few other teams. I think he had 6 saves in that run for the Braves in 2021 in the postseason alone, not just in general, but 6 saves in the postseason, which is really, really difficult to do. And as much as I like these guys, none of the other guys in this bullpen outside of Will Smith have any postseason experience. Jacob deGrom has obviously pitched in the postseason. I think Martin Perez has pitched in the postseason. Eovaldi has pitched all the way to a pennant. Heaney not sure. I think he pitched in the postseason this year. Not entirely sure. But I think he has at some point in his career. So having some guy in the bullpen with some of that postseason experience will be very, very nice. Maybe Leclerc was around in that first Rangers run. I can't remember, honestly. It's been a hot minute since the Rangers have been in the postseason, unfortunately. But I'm hoping that this year it changes. As for guys who were left off versus last time, Mark Mathias is off. He has been traded to the Pittsburgh Pirates for a player to be named later, and Jake Odorizzi was left off because I think he's going to be hurt. Also, Leody Taveras was left off. The guys who I added were Will Smith. I don't think I had Spores on there last time, but I also added, where'd we go? The outfielders, Travis Jankowski and Clint Frazier. I think that even looking at it, I'm already second guessing, like 20 minutes after I said it. But we could see a little bit of Sam Huff on there instead of one of those two outfielders. Maybe Huff would be on there over Frazier. Maybe they want to have three catchers. I don't know. I think that giving Huff every day at bats in AAA might be a better use of that because, I mean, knowing catchers and knowing specifically Mitch Garver, maybe he's not going to be the healthiest for the entire season, and just giving Sam Huff everyday reps in AAA might be overall better for his development. He is still fairly young. I think he is 26 still. Let's see. Yeah, no, he's going to be 25. This is going to be his age 25 season. So Huff is still pretty young, and it wasn't that long ago where he was on basically every top 100 prospect list as a guy with a lot of potential to be a very heavy-hitting catcher, maybe almost Mitch Garver level of just in terms of sheer raw power. Sam Huff is absolutely top of the scale. So, but in terms of how I feel about this opening day roster as opposed to last year's opening day roster, I feel like the thing that the Rangers really addressed is just depth. They added a few stars. They added a few nice pieces. Martin Perez obviously turned out to be fantastic. Jon Gray was a pretty good signing. They added the stars, and Lowe established himself as a star along with those two middle infielders. But it felt like just a little bit shallow. It's like, all right, last year it's like, all right, I get you have improved expectations, but there just wasn't quite enough depth behind it if something went wrong with one of the stars, or even if something didn't. Like, there just was not enough depth. This year I feel really confident in, man 1 through 26. Like, this is the Rangers are when the sign it's a sign of how far the Rangers have progressed, losing a guy like Mark Mathias just to sign a Will Smith, of like, oh, that's a guy who like could be a pretty decent contributor on a big league club, but because the Rangers are kind of like talent rich, feels really cocky to say for a team coming off a 92 last season, but they kind of are. They have more depth at that players 15 through 26 on a roster of guys who could be that, be it guys who either were that last year like Mathias, or guys in AAA that are kind of stepping up, or guys who kind of saw little bits and spurts of the big leagues last year. They have a lot of those guys, and I think that is just a huge testament to how much this team has improved and how confident I am that this is not going to be a 90-loss team like some people silly seem to think that is on the range of possibilities for this team. I think maybe 85 is like the absolute worst case scenario for this Rangers team. I think they're going to be a 500 team. I hope they're going to be a winning team and maybe even a playoff team, but at the very least, this team is not going to be bad, and they're going to be a lot of fun to watch, especially on days when old Jacob deGrom is on the hill, which I am very much looking forward to, that opening day first start of Jacob deGrom in Globe Life Field. But that's going to do it for today's show. For tomorrow's show, I will be back with a crossover with Locked On Angels, assuming we can get all of those files sorted out and I can figure it all out. But for your second listen, go check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.